Bore da, chroeso cynnes I chi gyd bod yma i'n sesiwn hysbysu dros frecwast. A very warm welcome to you all to our breakfast briefing this morning, starting a little bit later than we usually would, so apologies for that. But yes, it's lovely to have you all here this morning to what is our last breakfast briefing of 2023 on productivity in Wales, in search of a miracle. I'm told the question mark is important in that sentence, with Professor Andrew Henley from Cardiff Business School and the Productivity Forum Wales, Professor Bart van Ark from Alliance Manchester Business School and the Productivity Institute, and Tom Wilkinson, who is on his way from Barcade Shared Services. So yes, I said a warm welcome, but also a festive welcome, thanks to our MBA students, who some of them are in the room today, who decorated the suite so brilliantly. And those eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted some new welcome slides created by Hannah Pearce in our team, and she's put a lovely festive twist to them. So I hope you all enjoyed them this morning. Some of you will be aware that this week has been National Productivity Week, and there have been events and talks up and down the country arranged by the Productivity Institute. So we're really happy to mark that occasion today by dedicating our breakfast briefing to productivity in Wales. But I'll let Andy talk more about that. Some housekeeping. I haven't moved my slides along. If anyone wants to use our speech to captioning services, Cheryl is online, and I think the link is being posted in our Zoom chat right now. And the session is being recorded as always. So I mentioned today was our last breakfast briefing of 2023. We've had 1,300 registrations this year for our breakfast briefings, and that's a big thanks to you all, our business community, who continue to support us, and we are so thankful for that. I'm going to take this opportunity as well, because we never get to do it as a team, to thank Sarah Lethbridge and John Parry-Jones. Without them working tirelessly, without them working tirelessly to make sure that our monthly breakfast briefings are varied and topical, they wouldn't be the success they are. So a big, big thank you to you both. So looking ahead to 2024, we don't have links for you yet, but we do have some dates. On January the 24th, we'll be joined by Dr. Deborah Han and Dr. David Nash, who will be doing a breakfast briefing on refugee employment. And then in February, we'll be joined by the new Future Generations Wales Commissioner, Derek Walker, who will be coming to talk to us about the new Cymru Can Future Generation Strategy. So Derek will be with us in person in the suite in February. So we're really looking forward to that. Help to Grow. Linda Hellard is with us in the room today. She was going to be online, but she's in the room. We've got a new cohort starting in February. So if you've got any questions, please contact Linda. She's in the room today if anyone wants to talk to her, or her email address should be on your screen if you're on Zoom. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm only going to stand up here and welcome you and introduce our first contributor. So without further ado, I'm going to move on and introduce Professor Bart van Ark. I'm very pleased indeed that Bart's able to join us in person here in Cardiff. He's had a very busy week, trotting around the whole of the country. I think big event yesterday or the day before in London. And we've been running a number of these events at different corners of the UK over the last day or so. So over to you, Bart, who's going to set the scene and tell us a bit about the whole wider productivity challenge.
Well, thank you and good morning. And what an honor to be here. Indeed, we have 15 events in National Productivity Week, and 8 of them are our productivity forums across the nation, including Wales. And we make a point to get people from our headquarters to go to at least one of those events. And I had the honor to be selected to come to Wales and look at outside. You know, who wouldn't want to be here right now in this beautiful, cold but beautiful morning? I walked up here. So thank you for having me. Much appreciated. Yeah, it's been a really interesting and busy week. And you know, as I said, we had 15 events, but the high point of this week, indeed, well, the high point, of course, will be this morning. But another high point, I should say, this week was the launch of our productivity agenda, which was done in Westminster last Wednesday. I have a hard copy here, but it is online. So if you go to the Productivity Institute, you Google it, you will definitely end up. And who knows, we can get some hard copies, additional hard copies shipped to Wales, and that will be available here as well. Here's a quick overview of the topics in the agenda. It immediately shows how broad-based the productivity topic is and how many things we have to think about when we talk about productivity. We talk about skills, we talk about technology innovation, we talk about the place-based dimension of this, we talk about the policy and the politics of this. And in these various chapters contributed by 15 of our researchers in the Productivity Institute, we try to, first of all, analyze what's going on here, what's happening here, but also, very importantly, what are the pathways forward to get us out of this place where we basically are in a too low productivity environment. And that's really where I would like to start this morning. If you just think of the growth of the economy as the growth of GDP, the total amount of output, products and services that we're producing, you can do that in two ways. You can either add more working hours to the economy, getting more people employed, letting them work more hours, or you can grow their productivity. And that's what you can see in this chart. The first three columns are just showing the historical performance of this. And you can see how in the last decade or so, we're ending up by just about, this is the third bar, just about over 1% GDP growth, of which about half, more than half actually, is coming from adding more working hours. And only about 0.5% is coming from labor productivity growth. Compare that historically, for example, in the 1990s, early 2000s, we were able to grow at more than 2%. So we slowed very substantially. We're not the only ones slowing. There are other countries slowing as well, but we just slowing a bit more. And I'll come back to that in a second. Now, you can do a little thought experiment going forward, and that's what the last bar is showing you. The growth of working hours is going to slow. Whatever way we're going to look at it, we are in an aging population across the UK and across advanced economies. And of course, there will be some uncertainty about how much can we increase participation, how much can immigration help us to put this up. But the average is probably not more than 0.3 percentage points. It could be a little bit less, it could be a little bit more, but let's take that 0.3. That means that if we want to achieve just the growth rate that we had in the past decade before the pandemic, we would have to double productivity growth from what it is now. And I don't think many of us are really too pleased about the growth rate that we had at that time. And if you think about everything we want to do, dealing with aging and healthcare, dealing with climate change, dealing with post-Brexit globalization, all the other challenges we have ahead of us, we probably need to triple productivity growth. We really will have to, because otherwise we will not be able to just get the funding and the resources to actually make these things happen. So the challenge ahead of us is just enormous. And I think it just gives us a bit of a reality check what we should be doing. Now, the other thing is, how do we compare to other countries? This is a big debate. And as I said, productivity growth is slowing everywhere, but just a bit more in the UK. And you can just see that red line where I put the arrows. You see the gap opening up towards the leaders being US, Germany, France. The line just above that red line is the euro area. We're just below the average of the euro area and just below. And then we're just ahead of Spain and Italy. It's not a place we want to be in as the UK. But it is important to think also about the regional implications of that, or the implications of that across the UK. And that is that, of course, there are many places in the UK that are far below that average. And if you overall average is low, it means that those regions or devolved nations that are even lower than that are really too low. We have too many places in the UK that have productivity levels that are comparable to those in Eastern Europe, into sort of backward places in Southern Europe. And the problem with that is that we have too many firms, too many people, too many places there that are in this so-called low productivity trap. That makes them extremely vulnerable to shocks. It makes them less resilient if other things is happening. And we've been seeing some of that happening over the past few years with the cost of living crisis and the rising cost of supply. And it means also that if you put more investment in these places, it will become harder and harder to lift them out of this productivity trap. It's not just throw a lot of money in and it will happen. We need to really have a strategy around lifting up a lot of places in the UK. So this is our challenge. We need to accelerate growth to be able to do the things that we all agree I think we would need to do. And we need to make sure that there are too many places in the UK that we need to lift out of this low productivity trap in order to be able to do this. Now, the productivity agenda is it's a big piece, as you can see here, and I've tried to put everything in one slide, and Andy's only giving me about a few minutes to go through this. But I think the way to think about it, there are three main issues that we need to tackle to deal with productivity. First of all, we need to invest more. The UK is notoriously and has been notoriously underinvesting, not just in machinery equipment or infrastructure, but also in human capital and in other types of capital, like social capital and institutional capital and natural capital. We need to get that back on track. And a lot of the debate this week is how do we actually get a more aggressive investment agenda that is broad-based, that deals with public and with private capital, and that deals with these different types of capital. So that's one. The second issue we need to do with is that we need a much better way of diffusing knowledge and innovation across the economy and towards firms. We are a science nation. We do have, I'm here partly because this is one of the places where I can get the most brain power in a relatively small space, but we're not very good in this country in diffusing it across our economy to firms. So getting new institutions that help us to diffuse these technologies faster and help companies to absorb them, help to grow is a good example of that, is absolutely critical to be accelerated. And the third problem is that we need to have a more long-term focus. And we need to get away from a very centralized policymaking in this country. A lot of policymaking around productivity is done in Westminster, and it's been turned out to be very difficult to diffuse these kind of technologies to regional, to devolved nations, and to local places. We have a lot of fragmented institutions. We actually have a lot of institutions, and some of these institutions are great, but we need to join them up because productivity is about joining up resources. So at a very high level, that are the things that we are talking about. Now, to get policies, it's always on pro-productivity, it's always good to think about the three main aspects of this: people, firms, and places. So when it comes to people, and I don't have the time to go through this in great detail, but it is important, as I mentioned earlier, there are too many people in the workforce at the moment that are not in a good position to be upskilled, to be able to see the challenges of this more dynamic economy that we're facing. There are challenges, therefore, about skilling and education, and particularly intermediate education, but also challenges about well-being and health and employee engagement. Around firms, you see the little pyramid there, and I think that's kind of a useful way to think about it. We have top-level firms, we have firms in the middle, and we have firms at sort of the bottom of the productivity distribution, and we have problems everywhere. We have very good firms in the UK, but the number of firms that are performing very well isn't growing. So we have the top of our pyramid is gradually getting smaller. Very good, but smaller. Just one number, the top decile, so this is the top 10% of the most productive firms in the UK, they are contributing more than half of the productivity growth. That sounds like a lot, but if you have fewer of them, you're under pressure that you will not be able to realize that. In the middle, we've got all the firms that are actually quite productive, but are not catching up enough. So this is, if you take the 50 to 90% of the productivity distribution, so those are all firms more productive than the average, they are responsible for all of the slowdown, or not responsible, I should say, but they count for all the slowdown of productivity growth that we've been seeing over the past decade and a half. And then we have thousands and thousands of companies in the bottom that suffer from this low productivity trap, that are not able to make the investments in order to upskill their people, to make the innovation investment, and so on and so forth. So we have challenges across the distribution of our firms. And then finally, there's the issue of places, which I've mentioned as well, where, as I said, there are too many places where, we're in this low productivity trap. We need to join up resources, to join up our investments in order to get ourselves out of this. Now, this is one final figure, but Andy will talk a lot more about this, which is the regional perspective. Lots of dots here, but I just very quickly explain it. On the horizontal axis, you see the level of productivity, you see output per hour. And on the horizontal axis, you see the growth rate of productivity. And then you see all sorts of places in the UK, how they compare in the growth rate over the past decade and a half versus the current level. So everyone who's on the right of this has a higher productivity level than the average for the UK. Everyone who's above the middle point has a higher growth rate of productivity than the UK. Some very interesting observations. First of all, very few on the right. Again, it just shows that there's a limited number of places that are pulling that average up. It's London and the Southeast. Southeast in the top corner, they're doing good. High levels, high growth rates. London, don't forget, we talk often about London being the best place in the country, and it is in many ways. But when you look at the various boroughs in London, they're all at higher productivity levels, but lower growth rates. So we are confronted with the fact that our capital is actually slowing. Lots of places on the left-hand side. I just highlighted, look at the two arrows, the two regions in Wales, West Wales and East Wales. And, you know, we're sort of on the average, but certainly when it comes to West Wales, we're sort of at the lower end of the distribution. And again, it goes back to this point that I made earlier. We have a lot of places also in Wales where we are in this low productivity gap and a growth rate that's hardly above the average for the UK. So there's a lot of challenges, but Andy will get you in much more detail there. Let me finish on one thing. I'm sure that some people in this room, in every room, and including myself, quite often say, well, growth, productivity, you know, there's this debate. We've been talking about this for decades and decades. Do we really need more growth? And as you know, there is a movement that's now called the degrowth movement. That's actually saying, you know, we have to think completely different about the world to do this. Now, from my earlier comments, you can see that I'm not quite on that end, because I do believe that we do need the growth in the traditional way just to afford to be able to pay for the things that we really want to do. But also do want to make clear that growth has to be combined with the improvement of what firms are contributing, with the improvement of what places are contributing. And that gets us to this concept of what we call inclusive growth. And inclusive growth really is about three things. Inclusive growth is about making sure that as many people, firms, and places have access to those resources that makes them more productive. Access to skills, access to infrastructure, access to innovation and technology. Secondly, that we do think about how can we as efficiently transform these resources into outcomes. Whatever way we're going to look at it, every resource that we use is a scarce resource. There's nothing out there that is available for free, honestly. And therefore, we have to think about, let's use this very well, because we don't have that much of it. So that's what productivity ultimately is about. And thirdly, it is, of course, about the distribution of the gains. And the distribution of the gains of productivity has to be much wider than it is nowadays. If you do that, you get inclusive growth. It also requires us to rethink the way that we think about growth. We have to think about, you know, is GDP the right concept to measure, or do we need to actually expand this? But also, do we have to think differently about the resources, not just machinery and equipment, but there are all these other things as well. So we do care at the Productivity Institute about the nature of growth and how we're doing it, but we do also believe that productivity is an absolutely critical part of that discussion. So with that, I'm going to end. Let me just say one final thing, but I'm not going to talk about it. One proposal that we have in this book is to add a new institution, and I see you thinking, a new institution on growth and productivity to make sure that we pull this agenda forward. And the reason I see you thinking is that, say, really, do we need another institution to do this? An institution is not going to solve this problem. That is absolutely true. However, we do also realize that productivity is a very broad-based issue. It includes a lot of government departments. It's something that happens at central government, at devolved nation government, and a local government. We need to join it up, and we're not doing that very well. So we're providing a bit of a couple of principles, a blueprint of what a commission like this would look like to make it effective, to make it helpful, to move this agenda forward. And if any of you has thoughts and ideas about it, we would definitely welcome them. And with that, again, thank you for having me on this absolutely beautiful morning. And I'll try not to look out of the window too much, but listen to Andy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bart. You've set the scene extremely well for me, and that means I probably can say a little bit less because of what you've already said. So the question mark, yes, I was asked for a catchy title, and as you've already heard, the challenges in Wales in terms of productivity are very significant. Not only do we face the overall UK position relative to the rest of the world, or relative to our economic competitors, but within the UK there is probably a higher distribution of productivity outcomes than in most, if not all, other advanced economies. And Wales sits, I have to say, close to the bottom, because if I say at the bottom, one or two people who may well be listening to this will point out that in some of the very recent data, the Northeast is at the bottom of the ranking and Wales is actually one off the bottom. But it depends on whether you smooth the data or not. So this is what I want to talk about very quickly. Welsh productivity lagging behind with little or no growth. Why does this matter? We've already heard about that. And actually, the Welsh government have released a document this week, their new economic mission. And that's very helpful, because all I need to do is read 2 sentences from that to explain to you why it matters. Why is it happening, and is there a remedy? So is there a miracle to be found? So Welsh productivity lagging behind, but not growing fast enough to catch up. So a few more slides. There are, broadly speaking, 2 different ways you can measure labour productivity. That's the productivity of workers, but of course it depends. It's more than just how much effort they're putting in. It depends a lot on the whole combination of resources that the firm is using. Real output per job, and these are in real terms. So you can see that these have been flatlining across the UK for quite a while. This takes us back 20 years, and particularly since the global financial crisis. And you can see the red line at the bottom. That's Wales. The Welsh gap in 2021 was the output per job was 82.5% of the UK average. That equates in output terms to just over £9,000 per worker. And if you aggregate that up, it means £13.2 billion of lost output to Wales. So if Wales had the productivity level that was the same as the UK average, we would have an economy that was £13 billion larger. And I suspect the kind of presentation, those of you who might have been logged in yesterday hearing from the Welsh Economy Minister and about how difficult it is in terms of resources, some of those constraints might relax a bit if we had improved productivity. We can do the same thing in terms of output per hour. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Wales is a slightly better position because it's more or less on the same line as Northern Ireland, and that reflects differences in working hours. And it's a very similar gap. That there are lower average hours worked in Wales. So Welsh workers work on average a slightly lower number of hours than Northern Irish workers, hence the 2 lines converge when we look at output per hour. And the gap is £5.50. So in Wales, a worker produces £5.50 less output than the UK average. And that gap is 84%. So where does Wales sit in terms of the UK devolved nation and English region league table? And there you can see it. And this is actually this is the latest data, and it is unsmoothed data. So actually, the Northeast has had rather a bad outcome in 2021. Wales, hooray, is not on the bottom, but actually most of the other tables I have, Wales is actually at the bottom. But it's in second from bottom at the moment, and the gap there, 15.9%. That's the same number that I had on one of the previous slides. So you can see that where is productivity steaming? Where is it higher? It's higher in London and the southeast, and every other UK devolved nation and English region has a negative gap with the overall UK average. So we have a challenge in Wales. We have a challenge of improving ourselves back up to the UK average. And then we have the further challenge of the UK being below international comparisons. So here's another look at the same slide that Bart had on his presentation. And you can see that if we look at the growth in GVA per job over the last 17 years or so on the vertical, and the starting point, the position in 2004 on the horizontal, you can see that it's London and the southeast that are improving, that their productivity is high and continuing to improve. Wales actually is sitting there close to the UK average growth over that 17-year period, but it is well below the average. There are other economies who have declined faster, the Northeast being one of them. So, but that isn't helping Wales to necessarily catch up with the rest of the UK or the UK average, because the growth is just below the UK average. So we're not actually achieving a huge amount there. And I have a slide later, which I can show you for this time, but which does more or less the same thing for within Wales. But I can tell you what it shows. It shows, perhaps not surprisingly, that those, if you do this same picture for Welsh local authorities, you see Cardiff, Monmouthshire, and Flintshire up in the top right, high and improving a bit. And in the bottom left, the low and declining quadrant, a lot of the areas of rural Wales in particular, Powys, Ceredigion, Gwynedd, areas like that. And the low but below average but slightly improving are some of the other areas, some of the valleys areas. Productivity seems to be higher where we have in Wales, where we have a significant high value added activity. So Flintshire and actually the bottom end of Rhondda and Taff, where we have significant aerospace activity. Pembrokeshire also does quite well because we have oil and gas refining going on there. And that helps improve the productivity performance of those local areas. But in the deep rural Wales, we have very significant problems. So why does it matter? Well, productivity is a measure of aggregate business performance and competitiveness. Now, as Bart has already suggested, there are commentators who will say, well, you know, productivity is focused on gross value added. It's the same construct as gross domestic product. It's an out-of-date idea. It's peddled by one recent book, actually, which originates from Manchester. It's peddled by people who they call technocentrists. So I think Bart and I have to put our hand up and admit we're technocentrists. But my response to this is to say, well, if business is not competitive, if business is not improving productivity, how are we going to deliver the real wage improvements that workers so desperately want at the moment in the current cost of living crisis? It's all very well to say, well, you know, it's nice living in Wales. Look at the beautiful countries. Look at the, you know, on a day like this, you can go and get, you know, you can go and feel better because you can see dolphins swimming in Cardigan Bay, but it won't actually pay the bills. And without productivity growth, quite bluntly, Wales is actually consigning itself to offering a bigger and bigger begging bowl to Westminster, asking for larger and larger fiscal transfers in order to maintain the standard of public services and the standard of living that Wales requires. So we need to address productivity in order in Wales to be able to address our own economic future. It's not an end in itself, it's a means to wider societal objectives. And as Bart has already suggested, yes, we can have inclusive productivity growth. The distribution of productivity growth matters, but those are, if you like, political economy questions around which society needs to make decisions about. There is evidence that productivity growth, where it happens, is being taken in the form of higher profits by large companies with market power across the world, and that needs to be addressed. So if I just quote from the Economic Mission Priorities for a Stronger Economy document that the Welsh Government have launched this week and which was the centre of the Economic Summit yesterday, productivity is fundamental for a sustainable and growing economy which produces more with less, innovates, creates returns and rewards to workers and business owners through better wages and incomes. Productivity and growing businesses also provide the foundation for a growing tax base from which government resources are generated to fund these investments. So the presence of that paragraph in this document means that, yes, tick, well done, Economy Minister and your colleagues. At least I'm pleased to see that there. Because actually over the last 20 years, my worry has been, and this is a reflection of my own experience over 20 years of being involved with Welsh governments and advising on economic research, is that while we have made strides in improving the economic inactivity levels in Wales, productivity got filed away under too difficult, can't find the policy levers. Let's just forget about it and tell everybody that it doesn't really matter. That's not good enough. It does matter. So why is it happening? We've already seen something about the different levels of drivers. Here are the micro drivers. Skill levels and mix. Employee engagement is important. Good management and leadership practice. This is an ONS survey. Now, I wouldn't read too much into this, but this ONS survey shows that Wales is actually sitting at the bottom in terms of the proportion or the average number of management practices adopted by Welsh businesses. It's a common methodology that's being applied across the world, and these are ONS surveys that have been conducted over the last few years. And my PhD student at the back will tell you all about these surveys if you want to know more. Business decisions about innovation and investment, we've already seen, are important, and business support as well is important. How we support businesses, help them through programs like Help to Grow, through Business Wales and the support that it provides in order to get them the right kind of advice and support that will help them to improve productivity. Macro drivers then. Some of these, what I call macro drivers, are their devolved competencies in part to some extent. They're also UK national drivers, and there are international drivers. And some of these will be very difficult for Wales to gain traction on. But if we have the right kind of institutions and we have the right kind of conversations, and a bit more conversation, a bit less confrontation, perhaps, I might suggest, then we might be able to actually design regional UK levelling up policies that work for Wales and for other lagging devolved nations and regions. So there are differences in industrial structure. I put a question mark on that because although that often comes up, the evidence suggests that actually Wales isn't hindered necessarily by its industrial structure. In fact, Wales has slightly more manufacturing proportionately than other parts of the UK, and manufacturing is productive, relatively speaking. So actually it is not the legacy of heavy industry and the closure of the coal mines. That's long gone as an explanation for Wales's poor prosperity. Lower inward investment, possibly. We have very low levels of inward investment now. We have largely switched strategy away from attracting inward investment. And in the past, a lot of inward investment was not necessarily high value added. It was tended to be sort of, fairly low value added, and it wasn't doing very much. The stuff coming in was already semi-finished and not a lot was being added to it to get it out to the marketplace. Weak R&D performance is very important, and I'll show you a slide on this in a moment. And indigenous investment, private and public infrastructure investment in Wales is poor. And Bart and I did not compare notes beforehand on what he was going to say and what I was going to say. And I am picking up, particularly in the Welsh context, on innovation and on investment. So here's this is one picture which highlights the innovation R&D problem that Wales faces. This is business expenditure, private sector business expenditure on research and development per employee for each of the UK nations. England at the top and improving gradually. But then these are nominal data, so perhaps it's partly a reflection of price changes. We also have Scotland, and next Northern Ireland, and sitting right at the bottom, with levels of R&D per employee that are probably only just over half the English level is Wales. We do not have enough R&D activity going on in Wales. Why that is the case, I don't know. It may be that we have businesses located in Wales, but they do not choose to locate their R&D activities in Wales. We need more of that this side of the Severn Bridge, because that activity in itself is high value added, but it also diffuses and leads to value added being created elsewhere in the Welsh economy. And investment. This is a big aggregate number. This is gross fixed capital formation, and it's the same calculation. It's per employee. And again, you see the same picture. Wales is the gaps are not quite as large here, but this was, I think, picked up on yesterday in the summit that the Welsh government held by the contribution from the Resolution Foundation, who highlighted this particular issue, that Wales has. These are real terms numbers, so they're deflated. And you can see that investment in Wales has flatlined over the last 15 years. It is not improving. And it is that there's a significant gap between Wales and other UK nations. And that is a huge concern. Also, third area, institutions, governance, and capacity building. I don't want to say a huge amount here, but if you study what's going on in terms of the way in which the UK government are managing the whole levelling up strategy, it's complicated. I mean, if I was going to be a bit ruder, I'd say it's a mess. And our colleague Phil McCann says that, well, the UK institutions are simply not up to the job. They are not sufficiently encompassing. And we also have, in a sense, an insidious kind of short-circuiting of Welsh government through the way in which levelling up monies are being distributed. They're being distributed through city and growth deals, but they're also being distributed directly from Westminster on a bidding process to local authorities. And that isn't that isn't making for a joined up approach within Wales to the use of levelling up monies to improve productivity. There's policy churn. There are also, I haven't time to talk about these, but we have over-centralisation. I would suggest that at times we sometimes have over-centralisation even within Wales. We certainly have siloed thinking, and there is short-termism as well. And all of these problems contribute to weak institutions compared to the institutions that other countries have in the way that they manage this problem. So what do we do in terms of a remedy? Well, my first observation is a sort of a wish, really, and say, well, if there is going to be a miracle, it's going to be one that means that we live for a while in uninteresting times. We've had crisis after crisis. We've had omni-crisis for the last 15 years, global financial crisis, Brexit uncertainty, followed by a Brexit, post-Brexit trading arrangements, which have clearly disadvantaged the UK economy. We've then had COVID, and finally we've had the cost of living crisis, the oil price, energy price shock caused by a war in Eastern Europe. Well, the shopping list of things that needs to happen are actions by business, and I'm going to talk to Tom, a business speaker, in a moment about the kind of things that they're doing to try and support productivity improvement in their organization. Actions for business. Skills and innovation ecosystems are important. Getting the kind of systems in place that will deliver the skills that firms need and will do that in a way that engages with employees. And then policy coordination. And although we've been talking about the possibility of an encompassing institution for the UK, I would suggest that actually within Wales, working in close concert with that, we actually need a Productivity and Investment Commission in Wales. And we need it to build an improved ecosystem around productivity growth, and we need it to challenge the silo thinking that goes on within different parts of government with a small g at various levels across Wales, to be able to test and challenge and to produce coordinated recommendations for action, working with, for example, partners like the Development Bank of Wales, who are doing a good job, it seems to me, but could do a much better job at scale in improving finance for business in Wales to help with that investment problem. So thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to welcome Tom Wilkinson to, I'm going to get myself a swig of water. So you've heard enough from the academics. I think it's time to hear a genuine real-world perspective on the issue. And I'm very grateful for Tom. Tom is actually a graduate of our Help to Grow management program. But we're not here to talk about that, but you can plug that later if you want, Tom. So tell us very, very quickly in a sentence and a half, what does your organization do, Barcode Shared Services?
Yeah, first of all, thank you this morning and good morning all. Yeah, Barcode Shared Services, we started about just over 10 years ago now from 4 housing associations who were fed up of having tick box internal auditors, and that's where we started from. So fast forward to today, we now deliver to about 1/3 of the Welsh housing sector, plus some charities and other good causes. We're a social value organisation that does internal audit and shared services, and we've recently had procurement, and we're looking to expand into other shared services.
So you're very much in the business-to-business service sector, which is an interesting perspective, because when economists talk about productivity, we particularly have at the back of our heads implicitly the idea of a black box where stuff goes in, people make stuff, and it gets shipped out again. So it's great to have that perspective. So how does productivity play out as a performance indicator in your organization?
So for us, it's actually becoming more important recently. So we've always measured productivity within the organization, and that's often been done by quality and timeliness of like turning out reports, etc., and focus on satisfaction surveys from our clients. But more recently, it's becoming more important because we're trialing a 4-day working week with our staff. So that's had real benefits to the organization. Staff morale is obviously a lot higher. Staff all understand that they need, the needs of them more, and they've embraced it massively. And what we've actually seen is in the 4 days that we do a 100% salary for 80% of the time, but we ask for 100% commitment. So for those 4 days that they are in the office or working from home, whatever, their productivity has gone up significantly. And even to the point where every now and again you may see one of them pop in on their non-working day just for an hour to do something. You know, they see the benefit of having that. So for us, monitoring productivity in the workplace has become critical. And from what we've only been trying it for the last 2 months, and hopefully no one's listening, then them are listening, but it's the early signs of this trial is very, very successful. So it's likely to be made permanent, not in the 2 years future, because we've already noticed the productivity has increased the organization.
So your employees like it?
The employees like it.
But it's a huge challenge, isn't it, to be able to say, right, we want to deliver 100% of our output with 20% less labor?
Yeah, it is. It is a big challenge. Our board challenged us quite heavily on it. They were very keen for us to look at like a 9-day fortnight, but we've been struggling to recruit. It's a difficult market to recruit procurement staff and internal auditors. The skilled labor force, as briefly mentioned by the two of you, is not perfect. I think it's a nice way of putting it in the South Wales and Mid Wales areas. So we've had no choice. We had to find alternative ways. We can't keep paying higher and higher salaries. We've had to find other ways to benefit staff and engage with staff. And the 4-day working week is definitely one of those ways where we've seen massive positivity.
So do you think it's going to deliver productivity beyond that, just simply addressing that 20%, doing 20% more, if you like, with the same amount of time? I mean, will you be able to then afford to pay more competitive salaries as a result of all of that?
At the moment, the indications are that it's likely to go that way, but indications it's early days to commit too much to that one. But yeah, so far we can definitely say we can deliver the 100% what we're delivering now. It has enabled us to generate more income as well. We are getting, other organizations are looking at us and actually coming to us. It's enabled our partnership working approach, which we embrace fully. We try not to use the word clients. We try to say they're our partners. We like to have that mentality. And they really adopting it as well and can see how well it works for us. And they understand that our staff aren't available 5 days a week, and they appreciate that. And therefore, it has enabled us to increase our workforce as well, because we're getting more people interested in it, and therefore it's giving us more business.
So I talked a lot about investment and innovation. So is that part of your? I mean, are you able to invest in improved systems and processes in the organisation?
To a degree, yes. I think, unfortunately, we're not a massive organisation. We're an SME, and as we work predominantly in the housing sector, they're getting pinched left, right, and centre. They're trying to save money wherever they can, which is understandable. So it's very difficult for us to generate more income from the same sort of client base, if that makes sense. While we're struggling is to get actual investment from outside of the organisation in. So, as an organisation, we're service-based. We don't really have any assets at all as such to put loans against or anything like that. So it's very hard to get inward investment when you don't have fixed assets.
So in an ideal world, one without these kind of constraints you faced, what policy actions would most support your organisation to become more productive still?
Give us some more money.
No. So a more permissive approach from lenders like DBW and other commercial lenders as well. Yeah,
and to understand that not every business has, a building. We deliberately made the decision, thankfully pre-pandemic, it worked in our favour. We made the constructive decision not to have an office as such. We have a PO box in Cardiff, and we use our client sites or our partner sites to work from. Why should we pay for heating, electric, gas, and all those other high expenses when we don't need to? So our biggest expenditure is staff, and the second one then is normally our mileage claims, because staff travel to site. We have it embraced. So we've changed our mileage policy as well to help staff. And so it's as soon as they leave the house, they start claiming mileage as well to help them. So those sort of factors help, but it's the access to external resource and money, basically.
And lose productivity when people play bumper cars on the A48. Because I was about 10 minutes ahead of you. I think it was not quite as big a queue when I was going past it.
They've now closed the road.
So I mean, thinking about that further, what could Welsh government be doing, do you think, from your perspective as a business perspective? If we had the economy minister here in the room, which we don't, but if he was sat in front of us, what would you want to say?
Well, there's actually some recent. It's interesting actually that question, because there's been some recent decisions made by the Welsh government where they're big. If you take the Future Generations Act and some of those ones, they're trying to encourage more Welsh businesses to take part in bits and pieces. Yet when they've awarded contracts recently, they've gone to the classic, big four like PwC for finance decisions. When there are local Welsh companies that could do it and actually are more than capable of doing it, but they've gone to these classic big companies rather than actually embrace.
That's odd because they've been making noises about, procurement from the SME sector for a long, long time. I mean, sell to Wales and all the rest of it. It's something that we're aware of as a large organisation here in Cardiff University, actually. And it annoys me intensely when I see that we do stuff that SMEs could be providing to it.
Yeah, and work that procurement is one of our shared services, and Welsh housing sectors now actually procure more than quite a few local governments do in terms of the value because of the amount of work they do. So therefore, it's very interesting that we're not included in the current procurement bill. But there's also interest that, they don't look at what we're doing because we go a lot better. I'm not blowing our trumpets, but we do a lot better as a housing association sector in terms of doing the community benefits, social value than the local governments do, really. So yeah, there's a lot to be developed there, I think.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom.
Can I make one or two comments on
that?
Because it's fascinating. And the great thing of National Productivity Week is that we do all these events. We try to get people actually do the work. And the great thing is that Tom's story is a story that increasingly is being adopted by other organizations. We did a little poll survey this week, or last week actually, on asking companies, how many of you are actually thinking and tracking productivity related indicators? And when we did this, it was a different survey, but when we did this a few years ago, it was about, half, 60% of companies were sort of doing something in this space. In the latest survey, we actually find that 75% of businesses that we actually surveyed track productivity, which is really good news. It seems that there's a greater awareness, which is really the purpose of doing this. 90% of companies think actually productivity is important to grow the economy. So there's very wide consensus around the business community. Whatever we think in the policy world, the business community really thinks that this is very important. 47% of them are saying that skills are the absolute key, which again is something that I think you've been saying. 60% are planning actually to invest to improve in productivity and to innovate. Now, here's one interesting figure. 71% of companies actually think that the UK is in the in the top half of the distribution. And that's an interesting figure. Be the Business earlier this year, the SME think tank, came out with a survey across the G7, and they looked at the actual performance and the perceived performance. So what do companies think they're doing? And it turns out that the gap between the actual performance and the perceived performance is largest in the UK. In other words, we're not doing great, but we think we're doing great. And that seems to be coming out here as well. So there is a sort of lack of understanding that actually, how far away are we from the top? Do we understand the urgency of where we really are and what we need to do? And we see that reflected in those numbers as well. So getting those stories out is really important, I think. Now, the last thing I want to say is on the issue that you just said about, where you see initiatives of Welsh government go in and can benefit the big incumbents. This is one of the reasons why I think we need to have something like an institution that thinks about growth and productivity that really is inclusive, in the sense that we understand that productivity is not just done by a bunch of large companies, but that this diffusion is really important and that other companies need to be at the table, and that this is a very important stakeholder engagement concept to get more people around the table to do this. And I think that has to be a very important part of this productivity and investment commission that you're proposing for Wales. So I think that's something that I really wanted to make.
Thanks very much, Bob. Hang on to that for a minute. So we've got time for now Q&A.
I think we've got one online already.
Got one online. Should we go online first?
Are you there, Tim?
Yep, sure. Yeah.
Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. So my name's Tim Beale. I work at Admiral and have been a very interested member of the breakfast briefings of the last year. They've been fascinating, covering a wide range of topics. So thank you very much for them. My question is around growth. And given that there's now a focus on climate and overconsumption, how do we balance the need for growth with being good custodians of the earth, basically?
And can I also add another question from online from Calvin about, can you give us some best case examples of this type of inclusive growth if you have them? So 2 questions in one there. Thanks.
Let me take a first crack, but I need help. So, so first of all, on the natural climate net zero part of this, The inclusive growth concept is absolutely critical. And I showed this little slide that you could see at the end, where I said we have to expand our way of thinking about what the outcomes of our economy are, and we have to expand our thinking about what's going in. So when it comes to the outcomes, GDP is a concept that is been tested for many, many decades, but it has its constraints because it obviously defines the part of the economy that we can monetize. There are a lot of activity happening in the economy that is not monetized, and that includes the way that we're actually dealing with our environment. So there are now ways of great initiatives that are expanding this concept to try to include additional concepts, whether they're part of GDP or whether they're additional indicators. I think that's still under debate, but there is an amazing amount of work internationally going on to do this. But what is equally important is to expand our thinking about what has to go in addition to machinery and equipment and skills of the workforce. We have to begin to value the natural capital that we have available. It's a scarce resource, and it's as scarce as other things in the economy. It's very difficult to do because it's not easy to put a price on it. That's why it takes some time to get this done. But we strongly believe that this is the way to do this. That's another way than thinking that we have to degrow, which is just let's just drop the whole concept of GDP and let's just sit back and see what happens around us. We have to really work very hard on developing these new indicators. I think that is really important.
So, so what I'd add is to say that no, I've got one here.
You're good.
I think there's an inclination to see the whole sort of net zero agenda as being one of forcing compliance on businesses rather than actually helping them to explore how this presents enormous opportunities. Opportunities for new products, opportunities for new services, opportunities for new investment. And in some cases, that will be investment that needs to be led by government, public sector. So, for example, rural Wales needs effective EV charging systems so that, we're not going to reopen railway lines across Wales. We're not going to have significant investment in public transport. So there needs to be appropriate solutions and there needs to be investment to support that. But it is very much a conversation around how do you want the gains from productivity to be distributed? And that's where that conversation has to happen at a national level. I know that the Welsh government particularly strongly arguing for inclusive productivity, inclusive not just meaning in terms of achieving net zero, but also inclusive in the sense of where are the gains distributed? Are they going to be distributed to the more disadvantaged parts of Wales? And that is important, but those are important questions that have to happen. But I think once one starts to see these as opportunities for productivity improvement rather than compliance that imposes costs that will sap productivity, then it becomes a different perspective.
Yeah, and on examples of inclusive growth, a lot of these examples you have to find at local level. That's, as I mentioned earlier, you join up investment strategies at local level to give as many people access to good education, to give as many people access to parks and other ways that they can improve quality of life, to good public infrastructure and things like that. So that's where you see a lot of these initiatives. But you definitely need to work at a higher level, at government level, around making sure that you have mechanisms by which you can distribute these gains. To the point that you made earlier, if we do find, and we do find in today's very rapid growing economy that an increasing amount of gains from productivity end up with a relatively limited number of firms, we have to think about how can we distribute these gains further. And that is an element of, some people call it redistribution. I would call it an element of reinvestment in the economy. If the government gets more tax, they will have to reinvest it in the economy in order to allow many more players and agents in the economy to access those resources. Now, are there places in the UK that are good at it? Some are. Are there nations that are good at it? I would look at Nordic countries where we see some of that happening, but it needs to have, it's a debate that we need to have, and it won't happen overnight.
Should we take some more questions? If I could say, can you try and keep your question succinct and to the point so we can get as many? We've got three hands up. I know Alan's hand was up earlier, and we've got Keith there and Mark, I think.
Great, thanks. Alan Felsted, Cardiff University. If I may, could I kind of join the two contributions together, particularly from Tom, talking about innovation in terms of move to the 4-day week, with what Andy was talking about, innovation in what I would regard as very big ticket items, R&D investment, expenditure and so forth. What troubles me really is the quite narrow conception we have of innovation, and I think I'd broaden it out. I think Tom's contribution was a very good example of that. Innovation, which wasn't a big ticket item. In fact, Andy, you asked him Tom that question, and there weren't big ticket investments. So I think what I'm concerned about is the conception in the debate on productivity about innovation. And it seems to be very, very big ticket items, which will, by its nature, privilege large firms, large organizations. So I would like a more inclusive use of the term innovation. So inclusive innovation that would include, I would argue, beyond what Tom was talking about, innovation from employees. Employees can innovate too and give great examples of how things can be improved. And they're often very small scale. I don't mean small scale in terms of the impact they have, but small scale in terms of the pounds, shillings and pence that are attached to them. So I would urge more use of the term innovation in a broader sense to capture all of that.
Can we take a, yeah, do you want to come?
Yeah, I suppose for us as an organization, we have a very strong continuous improvement culture, which basically is what we call our innovation as in terms of that as our business. So we have that ability to with the organization, and our staff are empowered and encouraged. And some of the decisions that we've made recently have been driven from the old word of bottom up. We don't like doing terminology in that in our organization. It's from one of our colleagues, but the innovations come from there, and one of them has made us a good saving. And that was mean we reinvested that back into education for our staff, back into other schemes and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely agree with you.
I think,
sorry, I know we've got more.
We're going to have to wrap the formal part up, but I think if we've got a number of other questions, and I think we're more than happy to stay here and continue the discussion for a bit longer. If we're not going to be chucked out of here immediately.
Well, that depends on how Keith feels about his MBA lecture that starts at 10.
Oh, it starts at 10, does it? Oh, we've got half an hour.
And I'm so sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we started a little bit later than usual today. But I just want to thank you all for joining us and for the hugely informative breakfast briefing. Thank you all at home and in the room as well. For those who celebrate, I'd like to wish you all a happy Christmas, which feels very early to be doing that, but we won't get to see you again. And a happy new year, blwyddyn newydd dda. We look forward to seeing you in 2024. Thank you all.